introduce our wonderful presenters. I am so happy. Victoria Masusa, Sister Hyann, and hopefully Antoinette Gonzalez is either here or joining us shortly. I am so happy to have the three of you here. The three of us have talked about this for such a long time, and I feel great gratitude for your generosity to be with us today and share with us and help us begin a conversation, begin to learn and unlearn the causes and conditions that have brought us where we are. So with that, I will bow out and turn it over to our facilitators.
Good morning, everyone. This is Victoria Masisa. I hope you can hear me. Sister Hyann and Antoinette are also with us this morning. And I really want to extend great gratitude for Nomi and for all of you, and the Earth Holder Sangha. Gratitude for your presence, gratitude for your healing of the earth. And I also want to acknowledge all of our ancestors, and with deep gratitude, all of our ancestors, our land ancestors, our spiritual ancestors, blood adopted, all those who we consider our ancestors. Really wish to offer deep, deep gratitude. Also wish to offer gratitude to our teacher, Thai, and our Vietnamese root tradition that we are all following. So really just want to offer that and to begin with that. The title of our sharing today is named Intersectionality, Equity, and Justice, a beginning conversation. And I really wanted to, we really wanted to emphasize this is a beginning conversation and a step for all of us. So just wanted to offer that. And today's flow, which is different than your previous flows or what your normal format is, I wanted to share that with you. I will be offering a meditation. We will then be reading our ARISE Gatha and would like to invite Sister Hyann to do that. And that was one of the attachments. Then Antoinette, Sister Hyann, and myself will offer about a 10-minute sharing from the heart. And we have done this in other circles. And to let you all know, it's unrehearsed. These are unrehearsed conversations. And when each of us is done, then Antoinette and Sister Hyann and myself will join each other in a dialogue, kind of a dialogue of either what may come up or what we wish to share. And all of you will listen to that dialogue. And then after that, we, if there are comments or questions, we will ask that you send it to Nomi, and hopefully there will be time to look at questions and answer just a few, 2 or 3, or we'll see how the time goes. So, and then we will close. So wanted to let folks know about that. So with that, I would like to begin with the meditation. and aware that this is the Earth Holder Sangha, and a few of us who are from the ARISE Sangha really want to begin this meditation. And so wherever you are, sitting, standing, I just invite you to be in a comfortable position. And we really are invited to come back to our breathing. And we are one organism going as a river. And we wish our whole body to breathe as one body. Listen as one body, transcending the boundaries of a delusive self, liberating ourselves from our superiority, inferiority, and equality complex. Listening to this bell, we are reminded to come back home to ourselves. Breathing in, I know Mother Earth is in me. Breathing out, I know I am in Mother Earth. Mother Earth in me, I in Mother Earth. In touch with the air, I breathe in. Smiling with the air, I breathe out. Touching air, smiling. in touch with pure mountain air. I breathe in, smiling with pure mountain air. I breathe out, pure mountain air, smiling. In touch with pure countryside air. I breathe in, smiling with the countryside air. I breathe out, pure countryside air, smiling. In touch with city air. I breathe in, smiling with city air. I breathe out, pure city air, smiling. In touch with the trees that breathe with us, smiling with the trees that breathe with us. Breathing in, I know Mother Earth is in me. Breathing out, I know I am in Mother Earth. Mother Earth in me, I in Mother Earth. Dear friends, dear Ty, this is Victoria bowing in. And now is the time I'd like to invite Sister Hyan, if you could offer Argata for healing racial, systemic, and social inequity. Thank you. Victoria bowing out.
Dear Ty, dear beloved community, first I'm going to ask, can you hear me okay? Just give a little wave of the hand if you can. Okay, that looks good. Thank you. So I'm going to read the Gata that the ARISE group created and has been sharing for practice. So it's a continuation of the meditation that Victoria has already offered to us. Gata for healing racial, systemic, and social inequity. Aware of the suffering caused by racial, systemic, and social inequities, we commit ourselves, individually and as a community, to understanding the roots of these inequities and to transforming this suffering into compassion, understanding, and love in action. As a global community of practitioners, we are aware of the disproportionate racial violence and oppression committed by institutions and by individuals, whether consciously or unconsciously, against African Americans and people of color across the United States and beyond. We know that by looking deeply as individuals and as a community, we can engage the collective wisdom and energy of the Sangha to be our foundation for right thought, right speech, right action, right mindfulness, and right insight. These are the practices leading to true non-discrimination, non-harming, and non-self, which heal ourselves and the world.
Thank you. Thank you, dear sister. And thank you again for all of you joining. And as mentioned earlier, we are offering this beginning conversation. And I know in the description, it mentioned kind of a beginning conversation in what the role of racial justice is in the environmental movement. And that is a large topic. I'm also aware that we have many beloved siblings on the call this morning. And for some, this may be a new conversation. For some, not so new. And for others, there may be folks who are very engaged in this conversation. So just wish to bring to awareness just the many beautiful hearts we have on our call today. We're each going to share from the heart, and my mind goes to when I see the word justice. I see that as meaning equitable outcomes for all. Equitable outcomes for all. I kind of like to remind myself that. And then in today's, I'm going to start, I'll be the first one to do the sharing. In the meditation today, I recognized we were talking about air and pure air. And I'm in California, and as in many places, there are many fires. And currently the air is not so pure. So really aware of breathing and how we can breathe, who can breathe. I had this beautiful opportunity on Friday to spend a day long in the Santa Cruz Mountains, south of here. I live in Oakland, California. The air was very smoky in general as we were driving down. And as we were climbing the mountains, the higher we got, the more further we got up, the sky first was very smoky, but the higher we got up to our retreat center, we saw blue sky. And it was amazing to see the blue sky, and amazing that these beautiful trees seemed to be there for us, absorbing the smoke, really breathing for us, breathing with us. So I was really quite taken by that. And also aware that at this moment in time, here in California, in the United States, and elsewhere in the world, we do seem to be on fire, literally, as well as many things happening. That is many challenging times in front of us. So fire seems to be quite a theme. I really wanted to say that in terms of my first appreciation of the earth was when I was a little girl, and my grandmother would ask me and my other cousins to go down to the garden and cut these roses that seemed to grow wild. They were beautiful roses, pink roses and peach roses. And so as a little girl, this little 7-year-old would go down and get the scissors and cut them, and then run back upstairs to put them in a glass for my grandmother. And she loved to put them in her bedroom. Those roses were always on these altars that my grandmother had, altars of our ancestors. And every room had an altar, and in her bedroom in particular, she had 3 altars. So appreciation and remembrance of my ancestors, our ancestors, was an everyday part of our life, always with us, and thinking of our ancestors, as well as thinking of, my grandmother was always thinking of her grandchildren. And I'm aware that our practices, as in our tradition, we really are invited to remember our ancestors and to touch the earth with our ancestors. So I really see that as a continuous part of my life. It isn't anything that has been different from my early life. My family is from the Philippines, and my grandmother immigrated from the Philippines. My mother, actually, when she arrived, faced a great struggle with discrimination, as well as my father, but my mother is the one who I had more opportunity for conversation. So as a girl growing up, it has always also been in the waves or the energies in the home. Not only the love of the roses and the earth, but the recognition of our ancestors, as well as struggles that we have faced in terms of even feeling afraid sometimes to walk on the street with my grandmother. She would walk very quickly because we did stick out in the neighborhood that we were in terms of our skin color. So that too is a part of my life growing up. And in first grade, I recall that a little girl had come up to me and said, "What are you?" And I had no idea what she was talking about. It's like, what am I? I had no idea. And I went home to my mother and I said, "Mommy, this little girl said, what am I? What am I?" And she said to me, "Well, you're from the Philippines. Your family's from the Philippines." So it was just in my bones, I'm from the Philippines. And that's the first time I recognized that I was seen as different And so again, that experience is kind of interwoven in me. And so I'm just reminded of this love of this earth that we all have, and how in my experience growing up and in my experience today, I do not feel any boundary or separation between what I need to do to heal for myself and what I need to do to heal the earth, do and be. It's just a part of who I am. And yeah, it's difficult for me to see the separation, to be perfectly honest. And so some questions I had for myself is, or for all of us, is how is my struggle also your struggle? How is my healing also your healing? How is healing the earth also healing us? A little while ago, I saw a little video clip, and it was entitled Earth Rise. And it was a clip about the astronauts when they first saw the Earth from the moon. You may be familiar with that, or be familiar with that photo. And I was so taken by the beauty of the Earth and the colors of the Earth. And seeing that, oh my gosh, there's no, look at how beautiful, it's this beautiful being, the Earth, and we are beautiful beings of the Earth. And all these boundaries or constructs are that's what it is. It's constructs. We kind of have all of these names and words, and just to see that was just so beautiful. And so, yeah, if we are made of this earth, is there a difference with healing the earth and healing ourselves in whatever suffering any of us have? Is there truly a difference? How do we recognize this interconnectedness? What deeper listening needs to occur to the voices we may not have heard, that may not be a part of our group, our Earthholder Sangha, for example? What other voices have we not heard yet? And what is the root of this suffering? What is the root of this suffering? Is the root the same? Is it not? So I really want to end my little sharing with, again, something that I saw. I was in Sacramento a little while ago, and I learned that there is like over 200 types of trees at the Capitol, from all over the world. And what came to my mind is imagining the roots underneath these trees, just, touching each other, healing each other. And these trees, are they not like us? Whether we're Earthholder Sangha, ARISE Sangha, as we look at racial justice, as we look at environmental justice, are we not the same, bound together? Are we not also strong, standing together? Are we also not these roots, reaching for one another, protecting one another, being with one another, to listen, to heal, and to understand? So I will bow out now. Thank you everyone for listening, and invite Antoinette, if you would like to share at this time, if you're ready. If not, perhaps Sister Ayan. So this is Victoria bowing out.
Good morning, dear Thai, dear Sangha, dear family. I'm calling from just outside of Kings Canyon Sequoia National Park. So had to drive about 45 minutes to a location called Squaw Valley so that I can join in on this call. So apologies for if my visuals are shaking. I'm trying to set up. It's a homemade setup so that I can see you. You can see me. So I'll just share that. Yes, I too was struck by the breathing in and breathing out that we do in our practice, and in fact we focus on our breath very much and bring and embody what's alive within us and around us. And so I have been in smoke in Kings Canyon Sequoia. I was hiking yesterday with some friends, and there was so much smoke. And it struck me that the fires may begin in northern Cal or in southern Cal, but they do not have boundaries. The air quality, the smoke doesn't stay in that location where the fire begins, that they travel with the winds hundreds and hundreds of miles away, and in some communities will just stay put and until a rain comes, until there's another shift in nature, will the smoke dissipate. So I feel that for me it was a great reminder that how can we not be intersectional? Whether nature is hurting or not hurting, suffering or not suffering, by its very nature, it's intersectional. So the lands that are named, actually, that it struck me as I just coming to this location, it's so loaded with history, so loaded with racist history, so loaded with colonialism. Squaw Valley, you just don't think about how offensive that name is, and it's just very much a part of this history in California, and I'm sure it's not unique actually to the United States. So it's it's an invite to look at ways. I'm raising this as an invite to look at ways that we participate in and unconsciously or consciously continue harms. I grew up in Fresno, California, Central Valley. I grew up at a time when the air was so clear and clean that the Sierra foothills were visible. Now it's actually a rare moment when the Sierra foothills are visible, and they're about maybe an hour away. So that's the harm that we all are very much aware, the climate harm that's happening, that we're very much aware, impacts greater, and I'm sure it's old news, impacts in greater ways vulnerable communities of color. And I see that in how that manifests in my family, is growing up, there was no respiratory issues. There is now with my nieces and nephews having respiratory issues because of the air quality and growing up in bad air quality. I think also about when there's disasters, who has access to leave? There was recent storms, hurricanes, even fires. Who has access to leave? Who has the ability to leave? So I just feel like there's so many ways that there's an invite to really be intersectional, to really, so it's part of it is recognizing, like, myself, I have my limits, and that I must work with others to begin to understand, to practice intersectionality. That in my experience as a woman of color, as a queer woman of color, I have certain perceptions. In fact, perceptions of not safe. Actually, I grew up in Fresno. The foothills were not safe to go to because it's known to be Klan territory, Klan country. There's still that exists. Maybe not as quite visible off the highways, but definitely probably more so empowered in this moment of our history. So again, so I think these are questions, but I also feel that these are musts, that they're as we practice in Sangha, and as we are committed to engage Buddhism, really to look and see how intersectional our lives are, and where are we operating that's just replicating continuous harms. I saw, actually I don't want to go into it yet. There's questions, and so some of the questions we'll answer, and we'll get to that once there's some dialogue. So I'll just close there, that nature invites us to be intersectional, and really to look at ways and recognize our own limits, and see what ways we can become, practice, learn. So this is a practice of courage, a practice of vulnerability, and a practice of learning. Me speaking today is in no way, please don't assume like I know all there is to know about racial justice. I consider myself a continuous student, and so this learning is an ongoing learning. It's not that I attend or took a class and done. It's an ongoing practice, and the earth and us as who in part of the earth must learn ways to be intersectional. So that includes stepping into discomfort and learning to practice with it. That's some of the teachings we have, embracing those edges, and learning to transform our suffering. And that transformation cannot happen without just holding that discomfort. There's no jumping to that next step of action without really understanding one's role in whether it's within a Sangha community or various communities that we all participate in. I'll stop there. Oh, one more thing I do want to share. It strikes me that the founding of this country involves this doctrine of discovery, which at its core is about the dispossession of land and people, and so that's the history that we're working with, and so there is so this imploring of intersectionality is really an invite also to healing some deep wounds. And so it's not just to be intersectional for intersectional sake, but to really listen to various truths, and perhaps in that there can be some healing, some reconciliation. Thank you for listening.
Dear respected teacher in all of us, all of our teachers, all of our ancestors, dear beloved community, to Sister Haiyan bowing in, grateful to be part of this conversation, grateful to hear from my ARISE Sangha siblings. Grateful to be here and honored to be here. I also come as a learner, not someone who knows well, but who is willingly journeying the path of learning. I'm calling in from Toronto today. I am Canadian by citizenship, and I'm here right now for a bit. So just to say that in the ARISE Sangha, it's mostly folks living in the US, and I was even in the US when I joined, and so a lot of the language we use is US-centric, and we know there are international folks on the call. But I can also say that in Canada, a lot of folks think, oh, racism is what happens in the States, and that is not true. So please, if any of the language feels US-centric, this is an invitation to think about, oh, well, what might be a parallel situation where I am, as opposed to just leaving as, oh, that's what happens in the States. Not here, if you're not in the States. I come to this call and this work as an act of love. We can either live in fear or love. And though I fall into fear often, I think we all do. Choosing love requires learning how to love. And there's a Franciscan teacher, Richard Rohr, who I've been studying with, and I find he says very beautifully that the idea of love in general sounds nice, but it doesn't become a reality until it becomes specific. So you can say, I want to love all people, but get irritated by our coworker. I want to embody non-discrimination, but until I learn how to be non-discriminative in my relationships with people, it's just a theory. And so I come to the ARISE Sangha, I come to racial justice work, as well as earth healing work, as an opportunity to grow in love. And not just the sentimentality, but as a way to connect to the cosmic love or cosmic consciousness, or spirit, whatever we want to call this, Buddha nature. You know, it's part of the teachings that we are all connected and all beings have the capacity to awaken. And it's one thing to just look at that and think it sounds good, but I also have to look at the spaces where I'm not embodying that to learn how to move in the direction I want to be moving in. And like Cornel West says, justice is what love looks like in public. And so it's not just an interpersonal thing, it's how do we engage our relationships with people and with the land and earth and all beings. So I too don't feel that environmental justice and racial justice are separate in the slightest when we understand that we're all beings of Mother Earth, we're all manifestations of Mother Earth. The mind, the chitta that is dwelling in a state of separation is one that is able to exploit resources, to dominate other people. It's not any different, it has different manifestations. And to learn to cultivate bodhicitta, a mind of love, a mind of, or an awareness of our interbeing that is committed to awakening for all beings, it requires specifics, it requires particulars. And so that's my motivation as someone who's identified as white, who has European ancestors that have been in Canada for many generations. I also couldn't come in. I think it's easy as someone with white skin to avoid looking at racial justice in many parts, although if it's not always the case, but it does feel like a choice, I think, for a lot of white folks. People positioned as what is called white, that has a whole big history and context to it. But it's also because of the practice. Thai's teachings around connecting to our ancestors has been so transformative, and especially touchings of the earth. I first started practicing these a lot when I went to Plum Village for 3 months, long before I was a nun. And a group of us did 21 days of touching the earth, and to our blood, land, and spiritual ancestors. And the first few days were really getting in touch with family pain that was able to be released. And then there was a lot of, I felt a lot of shame and guilt around having European heritage in Canada as a Canadian. And the practice let me get in touch with the grief in a way that then freed me to not be afraid, to continue conversations, to step in where I don't know what's going on, but I do want to learn to love better. I do want to learn to live in just relationships. I want to be part of the healing of the world that happens within myself, within relationships with other people, and my relationship with the larger world. So I wrote down the words grief and gratitude. I feel such gratitude for this work and for being able to have hard conversations, because it's so freeing, and it requires grief, which is easy to run away from. So just to say, you know, and if we're looking at the destruction of the earth and climate chaos, I mean, how can we not have grief? And somehow to be in touch with things as they are, to be able to touch truths, as Antoinette was talking about, I feel tremendous gratitude, because at least we're not stuck in total ignorance, because there's no capacity for change when we're stuck in ignorance. So again, I was so grateful to hear the words truth come up. And also as a Canadian, our country has gone through a truth and reconciliation process with the First Nations people, Métis and Inuit. It's not done. But I've been out of the country for 8 months, and just being back the last year and a bit on and off, we start by, a lot, not everyone, but it's now become somewhat common to hear people start by acknowledging the lands they're on. So I'm on the lands of the Mississauga of the Credit Union, the Credit River, and the Huron-Wendat people, and the Haudenosaunee people. And I asked for their support and thank them for allowing me to be here. And people are learning to do this, and it's not going to heal everything, but the truth has to be spoken before we can reconcile. And to build a strong environmental justice movement, if we cannot be in relationships with the other people that we live with, there's no chance for a groundswell and a large, so there's also very practical reasons to do racial justice work within environmental organizing. A, because there's no separation. But B, if we want to be able to work with other people, the historical patterns of domination that come up, especially as racism in North America, sometimes other versions predominantly in other areas, we're not going to be able to work well together. And those historical patterns of domination that allow us to dominate the earth and allow us to dominate other people or be dominated are just going to keep going. And the movement to heal our relationships on the earth doesn't really have any footing. So it's also really practical to do racial justice work as part of environmental justice work. I think I've spoken. I put a timer on, but I guess it didn't ring. So I'm going to stop here and look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you for this listening. Victoria, do you want to step in, or do you want to reflect?
This is Victoria bowing in. Yes, I think now is the time. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is a beginning conversation and this is unrehearsed. And so now is the time that Antoinette and Sister Hyan and myself thought we would kind of have an open dialogue with one another, with what we shared or what may have come up or what we might want to add. Again, kind of an open conversation. So we'll allow for that now, kind of with one another, but also for your listening and all of our learning. So we'll spend, the next few minutes, 10 minutes or so, or longer, if needed, to have kind of an open conversation about what has been shared or whatever may have come up. So with that, I will ask Antoinette and Sister Hyan if there's anything you wanted to share at this moment. I can certainly share, but I wanted to invite both of you first, if you wish. If not, I can start as well. Bowing out.
Perhaps we can, the three of us can unmute ourselves so that we can just have an exchange.
Mm-hmm.
It's striking what you shared, Hyan. Really appreciate you framing it as grief and gratitude, and that they're not. Well, I see them as essential to being able to look at truth. Our country in the U.S. is so Hollywood about this, rather gloss over it and not look at some deep root, deep suffering. And I definitely see that because we have such an outrageous president who makes outrageous racist comments and is actually aligning with white nationalists, that it's in some ways forcing many communities to look at this truth of slavery and genocide. Maybe not so much as in those words, but at least to acknowledge that racism still exists. I think from there can perhaps be more an exploration of like, well, where did that come from? So, and I think I also appreciate what you were sharing about motivated by love. That's that's a powerful thing, that to be motivated by love. And I see that constant pull to be motivated and pull and lead by fear, because there's so much harm happening. I work with immigrants that that I just want to operate. It's easy for me to just react and operate out of fear and anger. And while there's a place for both of those, I'm finding there's no growth in that by itself, that love is the container. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Dear ones, another thing that came to mind, I don't know how many people know that in the last winter retreat before Ty's stroke, he introduced a 6th mantra called "You're right in part." And it's the practice that when someone says something critical to us, we can respond with "You're right in part." And when someone praises us, we can respond with "You're right in part." And I think especially for folks who might find it challenging to come to the conversation around racial justice and hear people's experiences and truths that that are different from their own, I just like to hand or share this teaching from Thai. It's one of our practices. It's a Plum Village practice to say, there's bound to be partial truth here. We can train ourselves, and if we train in one zone, it will spread to other zones. Yeah, not to perpetuate any guilt or shame, but just to it's another way of saying, "Are you sure?" Another key phrase of practice, which I know also when I was a lot more actively involved in environmental causes, especially around food, it was easy to get really self-righteous and turn off other people. and so I've also been taking, "Am I sure?" Not to step away from environmental or racial justice work, but to check my attitude that I'm coming into it with. Because that will inform the relationship more than the words. Oh, yeah. Victoria, did you have any reflections?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, sister. Yes, I'm reflecting. I too appreciated the grief and gratitude and it's scary. It's scary to have this conversation. It's scary to look deeply. And I know depending on where we are in our lives, I mean, coming from my own personal experience, we might choose, "Oh, I can't go there. I can't go, it's too hard." Just the awareness that I am married to a white man and who has chosen to look deeply at this topic. And what I'm aware in our goings on is he, and not just he, but just my awareness is, well, I'll speak for myself personally, and maybe for others I know who are persons of color or from groups that are not of the dominant culture, is we don't have a choice to be in grief or to be in sadness or to be it's like that's our life. We don't have a choice. Whereas my husband can have a choice. Okay, I'll go to this class, or I'll go to this, or and how easy it is to kind of just like flow back into kind of the norm of what happens. And so I think what's coming up for me is about the grief for those of us who, for those of you who are willing to look more deeply at this, and it's completely up to you, more deeply at this and inside of yourselves. We have our practices. We that also can help us through this. And again, I'm aware that I think it's helpful to listen to, for me, I know, to listen to other voices as well. Yeah, I think grief is a continuous. It is continuous. I mean, we have joy and sorrow, and always, and that is part of our practice. At least that's what's coming up for me in this moment. Also agree that it's a practice of courage and discomfort. That's how it feels for me, almost on a daily basis. And we are all family. We're all family members. We're all this beloved community. So how do we look deeply and listen deeply and be there for each other deeply, and find ways to understand more deeply, not just the other voices, but what what more deeply might be inside of us and our ancestors, to help us through all of this and to heal. This is a healing process, healing practice. And we're invited to look at what those real roots of the suffering is. So yeah, so that's what I have in my heart in this moment. And yeah, just I'll stop now and see if there's any other thoughts that might be emerging from Antoinette and Sister. Thank you. Bowing out.
I know there's a couple of questions, and perhaps we can look at some of those. One thing I'll say is the idea of discomfort, and especially, actually, I think all of us are just, it's uncomfortable for everybody, you know. There's no like, oh, I got this, I'm so experienced with racism, I can handle it. No. You know, it's there's discomfort on all levels, and I think that this is where the courage, the invite for courage is to really not get stuck in that discomfort or get lost in the initial reaction that one feels, and to really start to investigate and find places where there can be a holding of the questions that may be harmful to share with others, that are outside your comfort zone, or outside your community, or of a different race, or of a different gender, or not queer. You know, sometimes there's a huge need for communities that are marginalized to be able to practice and hold each other together, to share the grieving, to be acknowledged, and to grow. And it's also an opportunity to learn to witness each other's strengths. Mm-hmm. And so when there is a sharing, and you're stepping out, you're witnessing each other's strengths, and that can help in working in multicultural, multi-ethnic, various sanghas. So I'll just say, the other thing too is, like, we're such in the U.S. it's so trained to avoid pain. Mm-hmm. And so even pain that that can be helpful. So what has been true for me in, like, great moments of suffering is being able to take care and hold the suffering, and to not just let it be about feeling so wronged, whatever that was, but to also look at, like, what is it that I'm hurt about, and try to just understand it more. And I think part of that is seeing that it's not a suffering in isolation, that there's a context of often the suffering. So I feel like I'm talking in very abstract ways, and I'll just stop there. And maybe perhaps we can, if there isn't more questions, more thoughts, maybe we can go to some of the questions.
Dear ones, yeah, I think we have about 5 or 6 minutes for questions at this point. Is that right? So if it's okay, I thought I would just start off. There was a question about the 5 touchings of the earth, and that Thomas Jefferson is included as someone to bow down to. And so I'm just reading the question. That's okay. As a slaveholder and a man who had sexual relations with a woman he owned as property and therefore could not give consent, producing children he also owned as property, is there any discussion of removing him from the ancestors we bow down to? It's also printed on the Plum Village website as one of our practices. Thank you for this wonderful offering today. So I would just like to give a contextual answer to this of, our community is young and growing and learning. And we're also coming from a tradition that is much more an oral tradition than written. Even though we have a lot in writing from Thai, we're part of a culture. And so even if this is what's written, there's always an invitation to substitute and change words and names to what fits for you. And there's always an invitation to share this reflection back to monastic councils. I'm not sure which book this was in, but it would have been a group who wrote it, and they were working upon the knowledge they had, which is problematic. And if folks are willing to share different learning, there is welcome. It might take many tries because we don't really have an official overseeing all the wording for our practices committee. We don't have that kind of structure. But you and your sanghas are welcome to write your own touchings of the earth anytime. You're welcome to share amongst each other why you're choosing different people and taking some out. And I'd like to also give the other reflection that touchings of the earth aren't just about getting in touch with what is positive and what we aspire to, but they're also reckoning with the negative things that have been handed down to us. And we didn't create, but we've received them, and we have to grapple with them. So, so if one is really wanting to dive into touching the earth as a practice, looking into the pain of Thomas Jefferson being an ancestor of the country of the United States is actually a really deep practice that's really welcome. Not to venerate, but to understand that this is part of how this country was made. And if anyone's unclear, I'm currently listening to Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Fendi. I'm saying it wrong. Amazing book about the history of racist thought in America. It's very well documented. I can share, I'll share my email also. I'll put that to everyone. There we go, in case there's any further follow-up. Bowing out.
So dear friends, this is Victoria bowing in. I'm aware that there's usually about 10 minutes left, 10 minutes at the end of these calls that introductions are offered, and we're coming very close to that time. What I'd like to say is, as we mentioned, this is just a beginning conversation, just putting a little, pebble out there in the pond of Dharma. There's much more to say, much more to respond to, as we all know. I'm aware that Nomi will take all of the comments and questions, and decisions will be made as to what that will happen. And it is time to close this part of our time together. So again, wish to offer great, great gratitude to all of you, all of your beautiful hearts, all of your beautiful voices, and you know, to be a part of this, to be witnessing of this time together. So I will sound a closing bell before I turn it back over to Nomi for the introduction section. But connected to a whole stream of all ancestors, and we are their continuation. And may we continue to have joy, peace, and liberation. Thank you, dear friends. Turning it over to Nomi at this time.
Thank you all so much. This has been wonderful. And I'm guessing from all the chats that I got and worked diligently to get on to our facility.